Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a variety of terrifying encounters that I really want to share with you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. As well as Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links are also in the description. Now, everyone, I've taken enough of your time, and I really got to keep my mind distracted. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. I've never shared this experience with anyone. My brother owns farmland, which used to belong to the Tusarora tribe. We have paths down the left that goes between some trees to a clearing we made to put some scrap metal and store some old tractors. To the right leads to the house some 400 yards away. One night my brother was walking the dog, and she started growling and darted into the darkness. After struggling, she came back, whimpering and covered in blood. He went in after her with his rifle and found she severely injured a lone coyote. The coyote was close to death, so we picked it up and carried it into the clearing a few yards further right to allow it to die in peace, since it was clearly near death. It stopped breathing after we lied it down, so we didn't need to shoot it. We went in and washed the blood off the dog, and her snout was stained with blood. The next day we went to the area to bury it in the daylight, because the area is really airy at night, and the backhoe is in the storage area, which has an evil vibe when the sun sets, so we don't ever go over there unless it's daytime. Anyway, we went to bury the coyote, except it disappeared into thin air. No tracks, no drag marks, but flecks of blood where it had lied. Things started to get weird after that. Fast forward a few months, and I was lying in bed in the dead winter around 4 a.m. I hear whistling coming from the storage area, and I know no one is over there. It gets closer and closer to my window. As I held my breath, I could hear it breathing on the other side of the thin trailer wall. Then one of our big Freightliners pulls up with headlights on the house, and I hear it disappear into the night. The driver described it as having a goat-like face and twitched as it ran awkwardly through the trees. We moved not long after that, and only returned to the farm during the day after the incident. But you can hear animals wail at night and whistle. Today's second part of the upload. My husband and I went on our first walk this morning after moving to the country. It's not the kind of country where your nearest neighbor is miles away, but we are surrounded by trees and empty fields. As we got about 30 feet away from the bridge road by our house, we noticed a creature standing on the bridge, just watching us. It looked like someone dressed all in black, just staring us down from the left side of the bridge. We walked closer and realized it was walking away. No matter how fast or slow we walked, it was always the same distance away from us. When we stopped moving, so would the creature. What seemed to change was its shape it would take. As we walked, you could see it hobbling like a drunk person. If we looked away, it would move to the opposite side of the road and be a completely different shape, like a dog or some animal. As we walked onto the bridge, the creature was further ahead by the hill. It began to change its shape, and it had stick-like legs. It would walk, but would not bend its knees. It was as if it was on stilts. We slowed our pace, and it began to walk over the hill, still changing its shape. We got to the hill, looked ahead to see what shape the creature took, but it was gone. No trace of it in the distance. We can see a few miles ahead at this point, not a sign of it being there. Today's third part of the upload. This happened to me back in the mid-90s. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton and had duty one evening. Part of that duty was to go around and check certain buildings and make sure their doors were locked. At around 0300, I was doing my rounds and I saw what I thought was a huge coyote in the road. Seeing a coyote in the area would be unusual, but definitely not impossible. As I was watching it, it was watching me. It then stood up on its hind legs and walked out of sight between a couple of buildings. At this point, I'm alarmed, but figure I was hallucinating since I'd been awake for something like 24 hours. It wouldn't be the first time my tired eyes and brain played tricks on me. Later that morning, one of my fellow Marines, we'll call him H, asked how duty was. One thing to understand is the Marines seem to have a relatively large number of Native Americans. It may have something to do with the pride of the code talkers from World War II. And I've had one friend H say he joined the Marines because he couldn't find a warrior job anywhere else. We were infantrymen. At any rate, H was Navajo, and I'd known him for years. I'd even spent a couple of weekends at his family's place near Gallup. So I ended up telling him about my hallucination, and he got quiet and said, "That's," I'll call him B, another Marine in the company, also Navajo, but I didn't know him nearly as well as I knew H. "And he's a bad guy. I'd stay away from him." Now, it's always been difficult to tell if H was joking. He was a man of few words and fewer jokes, but he seemed serious. I told him to quit messing with me, and he responded by telling me that B was a skinwalker. I had never heard that term. That came from a family of skinwalkers, and that they were like bad witch doctors. At that point, I didn't know what to believe, so I dropped it. I can say that every time I came across B after that point, he just stared at me. I gave him a wide berth from then on out. Had some other odd experiences in the American SW desert, as well as probably a jinn when I was embedded in Iraqi troops years later. We could see a man walking around in the darkness, but nothing with thermal or IR sights. But that was by far the strangest. Today's fourth part of the upload. This encounter occurred during the summer of 1983. As I was about to begin my senior year in high school. My family lived in rural PA in northern Indiana County. Our farmhouse was built in the mid-1800s. In the early 1900s, an addition was added to the back that more than doubled the size of the original house. The original house was a 4-square house, so called for the 4 square rooms. 2 on the first floor and 2 on the second floor with a staircase in the back. The house as a whole was sturdy, albeit a bit creaky. Every night in the summer I fell asleep listening to the pops, cracks, creaks, and groans as the house cooled off in the night air. The house was built on high ground next to the mouth of an ancient ravine that ran for over a mile, deeper and darker and rockier as it went down to the north branch of the little Mohanning Creek. The ravine was heavily wooded at the beginning, then the trees sparsened to a few old ones, rooted into the eroded rocks and the glacial tide. It was dark and cool and damp down there, even on the hottest summer days, and I spent many summer days down in those woods. I knew the plants, the trees, the birds, the deer. I heard much I couldn't see, like the rabbits running through the brush and the squirrels high and up scolding me as I walked. I could sense the ones that hid and made no noise, the bobcats lurking and the nocturnal critters in peeking at my back after I passed their burrows. Sometimes sudden waves of total silence would descend on the woods. The air would be still, the birds would silence themselves. I taught myself to stop at these moments and observe. I knew it wasn't me that made the animals go silent, so I figured something, a bobcat perhaps, was close by. I never saw what it was that caused that silence. But I love to imagine myself as a skilled tracker, nothing of the sort, of course, but I will claim to know those woods. I also had a bosom friend and companion as roamed the woods and ravines around my house, a big male German shepherd named Chap. Chap loved to run and roam and chase groundhogs. We prowled along through the woods for years. This particular night, I awoke suddenly, very awake and alert. The wind was blowing against the open window. Our room had a crank-out window that were popular in the 70s when the house had been remodeled. The bottom of the window tilted out, and the rain ran off. There was a low rumble off in the distance, the thunder of a summer storm blowing in from the west. I was laying on my belly, my face to the left side on my pillow, and arms around the other pillow. I listened to the rain. It was not unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night. It's been a regular occurrence in my life since I was young. By that point, at 17 years of age, I was used to my 3 a.m. ritual, though still very irritated by it. Across the room, I could hear my brother breathing. I could hear our dog lying on the floor on my brother's bed, sniffing at the rainy air and is blowing through the window. Across the hall from our room, I could hear my dad's low, steady rumbling snore. Then I heard something that made my eyes fly open in the pitch. Black room. From down in the ravine off in the distance, I heard an animal call unlike any I had ever heard. It was a roar, a very angry roar, and to the best of my knowledge, the only apex predator in those woods was a bobcat. This was too deep and too throaty for a bobcat. Then I heard it again, surprisingly closer, a lot closer. I listened for my brother's breathing. Silence. He was awake. "What was that?" I loudly whispered. "I don't know," he whispered back. There was obvious concern in his voice. Then we heard it again. It had to be no more than 75 feet from the house, down at the corner of the yard where the trail led into the woods and down to the ravine. First of all, it was no damn bobcat. It was not a dog, not a coyote, and it definitely wasn't a man. Next to my bed was a softball bat. I still have it, as a matter of fact. That night, all I wanted in the world was to slide my hand out from underneath my pillow and reach down and grab the ball bat. But I couldn't move. Everyone in the house seemed paralyzed. I kept expecting to hear my dad throw open his door, but he never made a sound. Then 2 things happened in rapid succession. There was a tremendous crash, like something or someone had ran headlong into the house. Then there was another roaring scream/howl, this time right next to the house. It was an angry roaring shout so loud that I could feel like it was next to my face. I had never in all of my life heard an animal make a noise that loud. It was like a V8 engine with straight pipes, and it was running on full throttle. At that same time, there was a throbbing, low-frequency growl that seemed to make the house vibrate. All I could do was close my eyes and try to scream, but nothing came out. I must have passed out because the next thing I know, it was morning. The sun was shining. The house was still there. I slept in, which was very unusual in my family. I went downstairs. My dad and brother had already left for the day. My mom stood at the sink, washing dishes. I looked at my mom wide-eyed. Surely she heard what happened. She met my eyes and pointed to the back porch of our house, a small side room that housed a washing machine, dryer, and coat closet. I walked to the back porch to see that the door had been ripped off its hinges and was lying right on the porch floor. In the coat closet, with his nose pressed as far back as it could go, lying in a puddle of his own urine, was Chap. He lay there whimpering for 2 days before he finally came out. Of course, I was given the task to fix the door. When it was up and repaired, I went to my mom and basically asked, "Are we going to pretend that nothing happened that night?" My mom sighed with obvious exasperation and said something along the lines of, "Well, what would you like to know? You know what that was? Your dad knows. I know. We all know. Not much to talk about other than how scary it was, and frankly, I don't need to talk about it, thank you. And my family, that was pretty much the end of it. I brought it up once, not long ago, and my dad shrugged. I know as much now as I did that night. I drive by there on occasion when I'm in the area. I stop on the old country road and listen a while. I listen to the wind and the birds. I listen a while and then I drive on. Today's final encounter. I was out on a hunt with one of my buddies, hoping to fill a moose tag in the region of Clearwater River drainage. Anyone familiar with the state knows that this locale is heavily timbered and a rugged area, difficult to navigate and hunt in. I'd been in here a few times before, and although it's difficult, it can also be a very rewarding hunting zone. We'd been working the hillside, hugging the river, stopping at times to make some calls in hopes of coming across a nice bull, but to no avail. Now, don't get me wrong, there is ample supply of wildlife here, but we are always looking for the next trophy. Whenever I hunt moose, the meat is donated and the rack is mine. To some of you, that may sound nuts, but I was single at this time in my life, and if you've never seen a large moose after it was butchered, you could damn near fill a small walk-in freezer with the meat. It is because of this that I typically donate my kills. There are a lot of hungry people out there who are more than happy that I and others do so. I don't think that most people who have plenty of food consider how far 900 pounds of properly harvested meat can go in feeding the hungry. At any rate, I don't know how I got on that subject, but I feel that hunters always have to defend what we do. So my friend and I had worked our way into the edge of the shallow ravine, and we had scoped out some cows and a couple of bulls. In one particular area looked to be large and ancient, but we would have to get closer. Gradually, we made our way down into the zone we had been seeing from up on the slope and confirmed what we thought. This was a very mature bull, well beyond his years of contributing to the herd as a propagation is concerned. These are the types of animal that we try to harvest. Having made our way into position, some 100 yards from the beast, I steadied my rifle on a limb and took the shot. I was sure that I hit him, having seen the dust fly off of his shoulder on impact, and he took off. Now, just so you should understand who it is that you are dealing with, neither I nor my friend are good trackers. In fact, if you put the two of us together, you wouldn't come up with one good tracker. The reality is that tracking is, in my opinion, a gift, and very few people have it. We are always hoping that our kills drop somewhere near the vicinity of where we shot them, but that wasn't today's case. When we reached the spot where I had hit it, there was very little visible blood, but we knew the direction that he had began to run. We were doing our best, but found nothing. The forests seemed to be ever tightening around us. For 3 hours, we felt like we were going in circles, trying to follow its trail. We had just reached a spot where we were breaking out of the timber into somewhat clear slope, descending more than likely several hundred feet below us. As we sat for a moment, I pulled out my binoculars to have a look around the hill in hopes of seeing the bull and noticed something dark moving in the tall grass near some scrub pines. From our angle, neither of us had a good look at whatever it was, so we backed into the cover of the woods and moved into a better position to see. Having moved some 200 feet to our left, we crept into position where we could now see a huge Sasquatch beside my dead bull. It was kneeling next to the bull with both of its hands placed flat on the animal's side. Neither one of us thought about shooting it, which is another aspect of a good hunter that your average person knows nothing about. We had a tag for that moose. There are laws, rules, and regulations that we have to follow to the letter. We didn't have a tag for shooting a squatch. No matter what you think or don't think about them personally, we were there, we had rifles, and we were not going to kill it unless we were attacked. We watched it for maybe 10 minutes as it sat next to the moose and looked around. At one point it seemed like he was petting it. I remember thinking to myself that maybe it was just really happy to find this fresh beast lying there. I don't think that it was another 5 or 10 minutes later when the Sasquatch stood up, grabbed the moose by the antlers, and dragged it out of our view into cover. The two of us sat there looking and whispering to each other. We were wondering, just like anyone else would after seeing such a thing, what the creature was doing. Is it tearing the moose up behind the bushes? Was he hiding it and going to return with help later? I mean, we didn't know anything about these beasts. They're an enigma to us. We stayed there where we were for a good hour and then left, not knowing if it was still there or if it had gone away in a different direction. But I will say this, we weren't going down there to find out, that's for damn sure. We had the glasses on this thing at 150 yards of total clarity. The moose was more than likely close to 1,200 pounds, and this thing was equal of size. The fur in the bright sunshine seemed shiny and black. In fact, it was so shiny it looked to be oiled. Along with it being huge and muscular, which I am sure you've heard 100 times before about these things, what struck me the most was how it moved the moose by itself. When it stood up, it grabbed an antler with one hand and simply slid the moose with what appeared to be no effort all the way back into the trees. Like you or I would pull a lawnmower back in mowing. This thing pulled a half a ton with one hand like it was a rag doll. Even with several men, you have to butcher a moose in the field just to break it down in order to carry it out. And we would have had a hard time just trying to shift it around to make our cuts. This Sasquatch must have had the strength of 100 men. It's just that simple. And that's the experience exactly as it happened. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. A little later today, I'm going to be doing an interview with a gentleman from Michigan. I'm thinking that encounter is going to be super. So, needless to say, there will be an interview later today, hopefully. And with that, I'm going to bid y'all farewell. Have a great day. See ya!